and welcome to another episode of Curious Cat Crime Sunday with me, Shelby, and that's Ziggy. And today's episode is going to be on the Albert Fish. And let's get to it. Born Hamilton Howard Albert Fish on May 19, 1870, dying January 16, 1936. He was an American serial killer, apist, and someone who did bad things to children, along with also being a cannibal. He went by names such as Gray Man, the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Brooklyn Vampire, the Moon Maniac, and the Boogeyman. And let's get into it. A little side note, as this did take place in the 1800s, there will not be very many pictures. I have like one, maybe two, and I'll put them in the video, but there wasn't that many taken back then, so bear with me on that, and I hope you still enjoy this video. Albert Fish was born Hamilton Howard Fish in Washington, D.C. on May 19, 1870 to Randall Fish, who was born 1795 and died 1875, and Ellen Frances Howell, who was born 1838 and died 1903. Fish's father was an American of English ancestry, and his mother was a Scottish-Irish American. Fish's father was 43 years older than his mother at age 75 at the time of his birth. Wow, that blew me away the first time I read that. Fish was the youngest child and had three living siblings, Walter, Annie, and Edwin. He wished to be known as Albert after a dead sibling and to escape the nickname Ham and Eggs. Hamilton, Ham, okay, that was given to him at an orphanage in which he spent most of his childhood. Fish's family had a history of mental illness. His uncle had mania, one of his brothers was confined to a state mental hospital, and a parental brother suffered from schizophrenia. His sister Annie was diagnosed with mental affliction. Three other relatives were diagnosed with mental illness, and his mother was auroral and visual, I'm guessing that means auditorial, and visual hallucinations. Fish's father, a fertilizer manufacturer and former riverboat captain, suffered a fatal heart attack at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station on October 16, 1875. Fish's mother had put her son in St. John's Orphanage in Washington, where he was frequently physically abused, and Fish began to enjoy the physical pain that the beating brought. In 1880, Fish's mother secured a governmental job and was able to remove Fish from the orphanage. In 1882, at age 12, he began a relationship with a telegraph boy. The youth introduced Fish to such practices as... we're not going to talk about that. Just very gross things. You can find it online. Fish began visiting public baths where he could watch other boys undress, and spending a great portion of the weekends on these visits. Throughout his life, he would write obscene letters to women whose names he acquired from the classified advertisings and matrimonial agencies. So that was early life, and we'll get into about 1890 to 1918. And by 1890, at age 20, Fish had moved to New York City. There he engaged in male selling of the body and began doing things and aping boys, mostly less than 6 years old. In 1998, Fish's mother arranged a marriage for him to Anna Mary Hoffman, who was 9 years his junior. They had 6 children: Albert, Anne, Gertrude, Eugene, John, and Henry Fish. In 1903, Fish was arrested for grand larceny, convicted, and incarcerated in Sing Sing. Fish later recounted the incident in which the male lover took him to a wax museum where he was fascinated by a bisection of a human male part. It's hard to read and not say certain things. Subsequently became obsessed with actual mutilation. Several years later, around 1910, Fish was working in Williamton, Delaware, when he met a 19-year-old man named Thomas Bedden. He took Bedden to where he was staying, and the two began BDSM relationships. I hope I can say that on here. It is unclear whether or not Fish forced Bedden to engage in these activities, but his confession implied that Bedden was intellectually disabled. After 10 days, Fish took Bedden to an old farmhouse where he tortured him for over a period of 2 weeks. Fish eventually tied Bedden up and did something to his male part. I shall never forget the scream and the look he gave me, says Fish. He originally intended to kill Bedden, cut up his body, and take it home, but he feared the hot weather would draw attention to him. Instead, Fish poured peroxide over the wound, wrapped it in Vaseline-covered handkerchief, left a $10 bill and kissed Bedden goodbye and left. Took the first train I could to get back home. Never heard of what became of him or tried to find out, Fish said. In January of 1917, Fish's wife left him for John Stroke, a handyman who boarded with the Fish family. Fish then had to raise his children as a single parent. After his arrest, Fish told the newspapers that his wife left him. She took nearly every possession the family owned. Fish began to have auditory hallucinations. He once wrapped himself in a carpet, saying that he followed the instructions from John the Apostle. It was about this time that Fish began to indulge in self-harm and embedding needles somewhere down below. Okay, that's all I'm going to speak about that. It is a big part of his story and something he did frequently and something that was brought up in trial. However, I'm just not going to speak about it. I'm not going to speak about it. He did a lot of self-harm, and because this can be triggering to people, I'm just not going to speak about it. While Fish was never thought to have physically attacked or abused his children, he did encourage them and their friends to paddle his buttocks with the same thing that he did to abuse himself. Around 1919, Fish abbed an intellectually disabled boy in Georgetown. He chose people who were mentally disabled or African American as his victims, later explaining that he assumed these people would not be missed when killed. That is horrible. I mean, any murder is horrible. I shouldn't have to say that, but just some people have messed up minds. Fish would later claim to have occasionally paid boys to procure other children for him. Fish tortured, mutilated, and murdered young children with, quote, implements of hell, quote. I'm not going to talk about that. On July 11th, 1924, I don't know why I chose this because I can't talk about most of it, or rather I don't want to talk about most of it. Like this, it's something that happened to an 8-year-old while they were playing alone in her parents' farmhouse. I'm just not going to talk about it. I'm going to get past that. During 1924, the 54-year-old Fish, suffering from psychosis, felt that God was commanding him to torture and actually mutilate children. Shortly before his abduction, the abduction of Grace Budd, Fish attempted to test his implements of hell on a 10-year-old child he had been doing things to. I'm not going to name them. That person and his friends were playing box ball in the sidewalk when Fish asked them if they had eaten lunch. When they said that they had not, he invited him to his apartment for sandwiches. While 2 boys were wrestling on Fish's bed, they dislodged his mattress. Underneath was a knife and a small handsaw and a meat cleaver. They were frightened and ran out of the apartment. Despite already being married, Fish married Estelle Wilcox on February 6, 1930 in Waterloo, New York. They divorced after only 1 week. Fish was arrested May 1930 for sending an obscene letter to a woman who answered an advertisement for a maid. Following the arrest, there was another in 1931. He was sent to Bellevue Hospital for observations. On May 25, 1928, Fish saw a classified advertisement in the Sunday edition of the New York World that read, "Young man 18 wishes position in country. Edward Budd," and then gave an address. On May 28th, Fish, then 58-year-old, visited the Budd family in Manhattan under the pretenses of hiring Edward. He later confessed that he planned to tie Edward up, do things painfully. Very difficult to figure out how to say things without saying things, and leave him to bleed to death. Fish introduced himself as Frank Howard, a farmer from Farmingdale, New York. He promised to hire Bud and his friend and said he would send for them in a few days. Fish failed to show up, but he sent a telegram to Bud family apologizing and set a later date. When Fish returned, he met Edward's young sister, 10-year-old Grace, or Gracie, Bud. He apparently shifted his intentions towards Grace and quickly made up a story about having to attend his niece's birthday party. He persuaded her parents, Delia Bridget Flanagan and Albert Francis Budd Sr., to let Grace accompany him to the party that evening. What a different world. If an old man comes to your house, not that 58's old, but it's a little more than a child, and says, hey, can your daughter come to my niece's birthday party? You'd be like, no. That's just, it's wild. Fish subsequently took Grace to an abandoned house he had previously picked out to use for the murder of his next victim, Wisteria Cottage, not giving the address, located in East Irvington neighborhood of Irvington, New York. There, Fish did things to her that ended in her death. That's all I'm going to say. The police arrested 66-year-old Superintendent Charles Edward Pope on September 5, 1930, as a suspect in Grace's disappearance, accused by Pope's estranged wife. Pope spent 108 years in jail between his arrest and the trial, December 22, 1930. He was found not guilty. Then it gets worse. Letter to the mother of Grace Budd. In November 1934, an anonymous letter sent to Grace's parents ultimately led police to Fish. Bud's mother was illiterate and could not read the letter herself, so she had her son read it to her. The unaltered letter reads, and I'm going to alter it because he says some crazy things. My dear Miss Budd, in 1894, a friend of mine shipped a deckhand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco to Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he and two others went ashore and got drunk. When they returned, the boat was gone. At the time, there was a famine in China. Meat of any kind was from $1 to $3 a pound. So great was the suffering among the very poor that all children under 12 were sold to butchers to be cut up and sold in the food in order to keep others from starving. A boy or girl under 14 was not safe on the street. You could go in any shop and ask for steak, chops, or stew meat. Part of a girl or boy would be bought out and just with what you want cut from it. You know what? It's making me sick to myself. I'm not gonna read this. But basically, he sends her this letter and he's taunting her about her missing daughter, who I'm not even sure if they found out she was dead until this letter. The one thing he did say, and he was very adamant about, is that she died a virgin, that nothing actually happened to her. Police investigated the letter, although the story concerning Captain Davis and the famine in Hong Kong could not be verified. The part of the letter concerning the murder of Grace, however, was found to be accurate in its description of the kidnapping and subsequent events, although it was impossible to confirm whether or not Fish had actually eaten parts of Grace's body. The letter was delivered in an envelope that had a small hexagonal emblem with the letters NYPCBA, representing New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. A janitor at the company told the police that he had taken some of the stationery home and left it in a rooming house of 200 East 52nd Street when he moved out. The landlady of the rooming house said that Fish checked out of the room a few days earlier. She said that Fish's son sent him money, and he asked her to hold his next check for him. Detective William King, the chief investigator of the case, waited outside the room until Fish returned. He agreed to go to headquarters for questioning, and then brandished a razor blade. King disarmed Fish and took him into police headquarters. Fish made no attempt to deny the murder of Grace Budd, and saying that he had meant to go to the house and to kill her brother Edwards. Very matter of fact. Fish said never entered his head to ape the girl, but he later claimed to his attorney that while kneeling on Grace's chest and strangling her, he did have two involved. We're not going there. The information was used at trial that later claimed the kidnapping was actually motivated, thus avoiding any mention of cannibalism. Well, anyways, this was a short one because I basically couldn't read any of it, and not really sure why I made it in the first place, but I wanted to do a video about Albert Fish, so I did. And you can find a lot more information online, although I do suggest you do that at your own risk because it is gruesome to the untainted degree. It's very, very hard to read. It was very hard to say and hard to find words that were appropriate for YouTube. So I will go a little bit further into the trial right after I say this, but if you do want to learn more, research about it, you can. One little tidbit was his headstone kept getting either defaced or taken, so he now has an unmarked grave. Anyways, back to the story. Fish's trial for murder Grace Budd began March 11, 1935 in White Plains, New York. Frederick P. Close presides as judge, and Westchester County Chief Assistant District Attorney Albert F. Gallagher was prosecuting attorney. Fish's defense counsel was James Dempsey, a former prosecutor and one-time mayor of Peekskill, New York. I can talk. The trial lasted for 10 days. Fish pleaded insanity and claimed that he had heard voices of God telling him to kill children. Several psychiatrists testified that Fish's actual fetishes, which included BDSM, among many other things. There's like a list of 8 things here. Dempsey, in his summation, noted that Fish was a psychiatric phenomenon. Words are hard, guys. And that nowhere in legal or medical records was there another individual who possessed so many actual abnormalities. Ziggy, what are you doing, bud? You're making noise. The defense chief, watch this. Oh, you're not gonna do it? There you go, roll over. Oh, you got scared. Okay, sorry. Gotta have something happy during this very hard to say story. Gallagher cross-examined Wortham on whether Fish knew the difference between right and wrong. He responded that he did know, but that it was a perverted, the non-bad term of that, perverted knowledge based on his opinion of sin, atonement, and religion, and thus was insane knowledge. The defense called 2 more psychiatrists to support Worthingham's findings. The first of 4... Ziggy! Sorry, guys. The first of 4 rebuttal witnesses was Magnus Minus Gregory, the former manager of the Bellevue Hospital, where Fish was treated during 1930s. He testified that Fish was abnormal but sane. Under cross-examination, Dempsey asked if the editions I'm not speaking about indicated a sane or insane person. Gregory indicated that such a person was not mentally sick and that these were common provisions that were socially perfectly alright, and Fish was no different than millions of other people. Some very prominent and successful were the very same perversions. The next witness was the resident physician at the Tombs, Perry, a last name I can't pronounce. Dempsey objected to a doctor with no training in psychiatry testifying on the issue of sanity, but Justice Close overruled on the basis that the jury could decide the weight to give a prison doctor. When asked whether Fish causing himself pain indicated a mental condition, the person's we'll just say his last name, Perry, replied, "That is not masochism," and he was only punishing himself for getting to get actual gratification. The next witness, Charles Lambert, testifying that another edish was common practice and religious cannibalism may be psychopathic, but was a matter of taste and not evidence of psychosis. The last witness, James Vavasor, repeated Lambert's opinion. Another defense witness was Mary Nicholas Fish's 17-year-old stepdaughter. She described how Fish taught her and her brothers and her sisters several games involving overtones of masochism and childish doing things to children. None of the jurors doubted that Fish was insane, but ultimately, as one later explained, they felt he should be executed anyways, and I thoroughly agree. They found him to be sane and guilty. The judge sentenced the defendant to death by electrocution. Fish arrived at prison March 1935 and was executed on January 16, 1936 in the electric chair at Sing Sing. He entered the chamber at 11:06 p.m. and was pronounced dead 3 minutes later. He was buried in Sing Sing Prison Cemetery. Fish is said to have helped the execution position the electrodes on his body. His last words were reportedly, "I don't even know why I'm here." According to one witness present, it took 2 jolts before Fish died, creating the rumor that the apparatus was short-circuited by the needles that were in Fish's lower region. These rumors were later regarded as untrue, as Fish reportedly died in the same fashion and time frame as others in the electric chair. At a meeting with reporters after the execution, Fish's lawyer James Dempsey, Jack Dempsey the Fish, Fish, wow, I'm easily entertained, I'm sorry. James Dempsey revealed that he was in possession of the client's final statement that amounted to several pages of handwritten notes that Fish apparently penned in the hours just prior to his death. When pressed by the assembled journalists to reveal the document's contents, Dempsey refused, stating, "I will never show it to anyone. It was the most filthy string of obscenities that I had ever read." So, the known victims between 1924 and 1928, Fish was believed to have killed at least 3 children. Francis, I'm not going to read her last name, was 8 July 15th, 1924 in Long Island, New York. Billy, not going to read the last name, 4 years old, February 11th, 1927 in New York City. And Grace Budd, age 10, oops, I didn't read the last name, June 3rd, 1928. He's suspected of at least a dozen others, but specifically 2 others, and a bunch of possibles. So, I don't know, it was a crazy story. There's many documentaries, there's lots of books. I've watched a lot of them. I don't know. It's hard to believe that murder's been around so long. I mean, it has. It's been, back in biblical days and before that, but it's just crazy. Anyways, I hope you didn't like this, but I hope you liked my storytelling. And if you did, please leave a like and subscribe, as I try to post every week. I'm about to go back to school. My next classes are going to be courtroom testimony and modern fingerprinting. Wish me luck, as I will be started before my next video. And remember, be good to each other and have a great week. Bye.